Blessed Easter morning, one and all. As we have known, as we have lived, so we now shout again, He is risen, He is risen indeed. This is the story. No. This is the reality of God's love from creation to crucifixion to resurrection. God is love, and nothing, not even death, can bring this love to an end. The hymn that we opened with, Now the Green Blade Rises, says in verse 1, Love lives again, that with the dead has been. Reminds me of Jesus' teaching we shared not too long ago from John 12. Jesus said, The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. To be glorified doesn't sound like a man that's going to lose everything. Doesn't sound like a man looking for defeat. In fact, Jesus continues. He says, Very truly, I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Now, he speaks of us as bearing fruit for others, but he also speaks of himself to be glorified, bearing much fruit, bearing death to life, love given so that salvation is yours by him. That's why I wanted the quiet and yet beautiful Now the Green Blade Rises to be the first thing we heard. Verse 4 says this, When our hearts are wintry, grieving or in pain, your touch can call us back to life again. Fields of our hearts and dead and bare have been. Love is come again, like wheat arising green. Now, we've spent the last 40 days examining ourselves, at least I hope so, but also leaning upon the everlasting arms of God's love. Listen to Psalm 103. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and don't forget all of his benefits, who forgives all your iniquity, who heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from the pit, who crowns you with steadfast love and mercy, who satisfies you with good as long as you live, so that your youth is renewed like the eagles. The Lord works vindication and justice for all who are oppressed. He made known his ways to Moses and his acts to the people of Israel. The Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, yes, and abounding in steadfast love. Love that will not let us go, even though we may be afraid. Think about this. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, they bought spices and they brought them to the tomb because while their heads and hearts were unable to see, they were still attached to this world and the burden of death. Then the sun came up early morning. Who's going to roll back that huge stone? They wondered. And then the impossible begins. The stone has been removed. The tomb is empty of the body. They brought the spices. Gone. A young man, maybe an angel, I don't know, Scripture doesn't really say, says, Love lives again, or another version says, Why do you seek the living among the dead? Don't be alarmed or be afraid. Taken beyond the pale of human understanding, God's love will not stop. He has been raised. The question for us today is, do you believe it? Well, they didn't, at least not for a bit. They ran away and said nothing to anyone, and that's how the Gospel of Mark ends. Easter is celebrated because we have the story told and shared in the lives of many people, over and over, witnessed by their life and their living. But you are asked to live this love again. My mother had a saying, I know I talk a lot about my mom, but she made an impression upon me. when I wasn't behaving, when I was not using my manners, when I was not acting more grown up, she would say, Stephen, you're not doing it right. You had better start acting like it. You had better start acting like it? That's what I remember. So the stone is rolled away, the improbable. The tomb is empty, impossible, at least by worldly standards. What are we going to start acting like? What are you afraid of? Something someone might say? What are you afraid of? Like Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, keep us quiet about his love. If you know you are loved, what's holding you back? One of the most beautiful emotions, one of the most needed emotions for our world today is love. Not just a feeling, but who you are. Is it easy to say I love you? I suppose, what if it isn't returned? Yet, it's still an excellent place to start. Why feel awkward? I mean, it does make a difference in your heart and the other people's hearts. And God has made it clear on this Easter morning, your love will be returned because God is love. Love has come again today because even death cannot keep it from you and me. You will never be denied God's love in Jesus. Each gospel has a slightly different version of the Easter morning, but a commonality is found in Luke's gospel. It says that the women returned from the empty tomb and they told all of this to the 11, all of the others, and they named them again. They said now it's Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary mother of James, and the other women. So there was more in this gospel, and they told the disciples. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. Even on the road to Emmaus, you remember that story, the two disciples bemoaning what had happened, saying to the then unrecognized risen Jesus, we had hoped. Are we here today facing the world wondering if our hope is working and real? Or are we facing the world even amid the current turmoil of COVID, knowing that love is come again? Don't stop saying I love you to people, for God never will. That is the empty tomb. So what's your reality? What's my reality? I've just got to accept that this is the way things are. That's what she said to me as I attempted to comfort her after the sudden, unexpected death of her husband. You know, many of you have gone through grief, and if you haven't, you will. Could confirm that this is the great challenge of bereavement, accepting that this is the way things are. I close my eyes and I can hardly imagine the 550,000 people who have died due to COVID this past year in our country alone, and their families and friends grieving. There is no life without death, which means that there is no having without losing. No embrace and love without loss and relinquishment. Death becomes the ultimate fact of life to which we must adjust. On the one hand, that's a true statement. No one gets out of this world alive, is an old saying I heard. Or here's another one, you can't take it with you. I guess referring to wealth. But that's not the end of the story. As I mentioned in this month's newsletter, by faith, Easter is the never-ending story. Don't give up saying I love you, for God will not. That's why the stone has been rolled away. Grief and death is overcome. Why do you seek the living among the dead, said the angel. In Jesus Christ we know now that the dwelling place of God will be with you and me. And isn't that what Revelation 21 says? Now God's home is with you and me. He will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them. He'll wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death and mourning will be no more. Crying and pain will be no more. For the first things have passed away. That's why I truly love that hymn, Now the Green Blade Rises. It is the reality of our faith, and it's the hope for our life which will lead us into the next. God's joy and eternity. Love has come again, like wheat rising green. The women and the disciples were afraid at first and said nothing. But you know what? This is the birth of the church, and we are here. So their voices of love were heard down through the ages. So let's end it this way. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Thanks be to God.